Good morning, Year 11. I hope you're well and having a lovely day, and you're now fully into the swing of online learning again. Okay, so please do write the date and the title. The title is Critical Style 3-part paragraphs. Today you'll need pens, highlighter and a ruler, your English language book, and the extract on class charts. Before you do now, I would like you to rewrite this paragraph so it has better critical style. So take a moment, read through it, and then rework it so as to improve it. Please spend about 5 minutes doing that now. Okay, so let's go through together. Firstly, EB. Ideally, you want to use the surname, so in this case, it would be White. Uses language too, so please do avoid stating they use language, they use structure. It seems very amateur and not very sophisticated at all. So please avoid using those terms. Launch straight into terminology here. So what I would say is White uses a metaphor through the quotation. Or even forget quotation, you can just say White uses a metaphor and then go straight into your quote. So avoid waffle, keep it very precise, keep it very concise, and make every word count. So White uses language, you've got rid of that. In terms of the quotation that they've used, it's significantly too long. So once again, linking back to this idea of being precise, ideally you don't want a quotation any longer than a line. Typically speaking, the best quotations tend to be on the shorter side. Or if you are using a longer quotation, make sure you pick it apart and analyze in greater depth particular words or short phrases. So to get into the kind of detailed analysis that you need to enter the higher marks, you need very precise, detailed explanations of short quotes. And you can't do that if you've got a really long quote. So here we've got a quote that is 2 lines long, which is much too long. Also, ideally, they should be embedded. So embedded, most of you are now using embedded quotes, which is fantastic. It's where the quote is woven in. So instead of saying, uses language to comfort the reader in this quote, X uses the quote, you weave it in. So White uses the metaphor of, and then you start your quote, of seeds of goodness. So making it flow like a regular sentence instead of making it seem very artificial by saying, this is a quote, here it is. This metaphor makes goodness and people seem natural as it's compared to a seed. So this whole explanation could have been done in a much more succinct, organic way. This comforts the reader because seeds can grow, so we think that this goodness can grow too. Also, word level analysis of sprout. Waiting to sprout, what word class is it? It's a verb, so you could talk about the verb sprout. So let's go back through that first paragraph. White uses the metaphor seeds of goodness to indicate humanity's ability to grow in magnanimity or in kindness. And then you can talk about the verb sprout has connotations of growth, and you could say new beginnings or something along those lines. Then you've got EB's structure, so again we'll take that out. And again you've got this kind of clunky, quite childlike structure of structure, quote, long quote, identify term, this makes the reader feel. So that will get you a level 4, but we're trying to move up from that now and make it more sophisticated, make it more developed. So again, you would say White uses a tricolon when they refer to relentlessness, inventiveness, and ingenuity. And you could individually quote those words, or with that embedded quote I just gave you, You could do ellipses. So if you want to miss out bits of the quote to make it fit what you're saying, you can just use ellipsis, so 3 dots, to take out the words or bits of the quote that you don't want to use. So remember, with embedded quotes, you're using that quote organically, you're making it fit how you're writing. You're not kind of shoving it in there. Here's a quote, and just placing it in. You're weaving an answer that includes the quote. This tricolon shows 3 great qualities that people have and makes the reader feel that man has all of the skills he needs to make life better. So you could boost this point by combining it with word level analysis of the tricolon. So in the same way we talked about the verb sprout and its connotations, once again you could talk about the adjectives relentlessness, inventiveness, and ingenuity. You could talk about the connotations of each of those words, and then moving on to the analysis of the tricolon, you can talk about how those words link together and the effect of having those 3 words. As I always mention, it isn't enough to identify a language or a structure technique. You're not going to get any marks for that. You're talking about, you link it to content. So when you're thinking about how do I analyze a tricolon, how do I analyze a metaphor, you think about the purpose. What is the writer trying to do? So put yourself in the mind of the writer, think about what they're trying to achieve by using the metaphor or the tricolon or that word choice, and that should inform your analysis of the technique. So here, you're thinking about what's the impact of having those 3 adjectives, relentlessness, inventiveness, ingenuity, combined as opposed to having a single adjective. What point is being emphasized? You can't just say for emphasis, that's not good enough. You need to say specifically what is being emphasized, and you do that by thinking about the purpose, why is the writer writing, and then in specifically what point are they trying to make through that tricolon. Okay, so what I'd like to do is rewrite those 2 paragraphs, bearing in mind what I've said, and also make notes of some of the key points I just went through. So pause the video to do that now. Okay, so task 1, 3-part paragraph structure. So today we're going to be learning how to write 3-part paragraphs. This will help you to be more concise when analysing language and structure. So part 1 is make your point using appropriate terminology. Part 2 is embed a quotation in your analysis. And part 3 is link your analysis to the effect on the reader. So as you may have noticed, it's very similar to Peel. So make your point is like the P, but it's got terminology in there too. Embed your quotation is like the E. Part 3 is like A, link your analysis, and then L, consider the effect on the reader. So it's pretty much just a different way of framing the Peel, but some people do prefer this. They find it helps to streamline their answer. So whatever works for you. So please take a moment to write down part 1, part 2, and part 3 of the 3-part paragraph structure. Remember, you can use Peel. This is just an alternative. You don't have to use it. Part 2. 3-part paragraph example. So please could you now copy down the example. White's metaphor, seed of goodness, illustrates the potential of kindness and morality to grow in all of us. The reference to nature makes this goodness seem organic, and the positive verb sprout highlights that this growth can be achieved quickly. This comforts the reader as we feel that this much needed change will be swift and unchallenging. So pause the video, copy that down, and please do make sure you've separated it with 3 separate colours. So you can write it out in 3 colours, or you can use highlighters or underline. Just make sure the 3 sections are differentiated. Okay, so Admiral McRaven's speech. We're going to use the 3-part paragraph format to analyse a speech delivered by Admiral McRaven to the graduates of the University of Texas on the 17th of May 2014. In his speech, the Admiral shares the lessons he learned while training to be a Navy SEAL. Okay, so what I'd like you to do now is use your extract of the speech, which is on class charts, so please make sure you've printed out a copy if you can. If not, you can annotate it on your computer, and please could you annotate it, picking out language and structure devices, and you're doing this to answer the question, how does Admiral McRaven use language and structure to convince the reader of the importance of hope? So spend 10 minutes annotating it for language and structure so that you can answer that question. Okay, so this is what you may have picked out. So the Admiral describes the difficult conditions in detail, accentuating the triumph of hope. So it is on Wednesday of Hell Week that you paddle down to the mud flats and spend the next 15 hours trying to survive the freezing cold mud, the howling wind, and the incessant pressure to quit from the instructors. So if you didn't know, incessant means never ending, constant. You've got howling, so the personification builds dramatic tension. Almost seems as if the elements are out to get them, so it creates a hostile environment, very powerful imagery there. Freezing mud, howling wind, incessant pressure forms a tricolon to set the scene, showing how hard it was for me so that we know how much they needed hope. As the sun began to set that Wednesday evening, my training class, having committed some egregious infraction of the rules, was ordered into the mud. Personification of mud to build dramatic tension. Again, the elements are out to get them. The mud consumed each man till there was nothing visible but our heads. So again, personification. The instructors told us we could leave the mud if only 5 men would quit. Just 5 men, and we could get out of the oppressive cold. Looking around the mud flat, it was apparent that some students were about to give up. It was still over 8 hours till the sun came up, 8 more hours of bone-chilling cold. So here we have sensory imagery, detail of sounds making the suffering more vivid in the next sentence, but altogether with that sentence and the following sentence we've got listing of physical effects. The chattering teeth and shivering moans of the trainees was so loud it was hard to hear anything. So very powerful imagery there. And if you were doing analysis, you would make a starting point talking about the imagery or the physical effects, and then you would hone in on particular words. So I would talk about the adjective chattering and how that's very powerful because it gives connotations of extreme cold, extreme suffering. And also shivering moans as personification, again showing how this pain is almost taking on a life of its own. And then, so that phraseology indicates a turning point in the text. One voice began to echo through the night, one voice raised in song. So we've got repetition emphasizing the power of one person's hope. The song was terribly out of tune, but sung with great enthusiasm. One voice became 2, and 2 became 3, and before long everyone in the class was singing. We, so we've got the personal pronoun, knew that if one man could rise above the misery, then others could as well. So throughout that section, after we've had the turning point, we've got that repetition of one and then that shift from one to we. Because remember, linking back to macro structure, how is this whole extract ordered in terms of ideas? Beginning, you could say very pessimistic, very negative, and then you've got that turning point, and now you've got a shift towards the optimistic and the positive. 1 becoming 2, giving a sense of unity and the power of camaraderie. The instructors threatened us with more time in the mud if we kept singing, but the singing persisted, and somehow the mud seemed a little warmer, the wind a little tamer, and the dawn not so far away. So the tricolon here emphasizes the contrast. So again, think about the beginning when you had freezing cold mud, howling wind, incessant pressure, and that directly contrasts. You can talk about the dichotomy between that initial sentence and how towards the end, um, the writer's perspectives, the writer's perspective has changed as a result of the attitude of the people around. And you've got that direct contrast between the three things that seemed so impossibly difficult at the start and so negative, with the same things being described in a much more positive manner. And that dichotomy is emphasized through the two tricolons. If I have learned anything in my time traveling the world, it is the power of hope, the power of one person. Washington, Lincoln, King, Mandela, and even a young girl from Pakistan, Malala. One person can change the world by giving people hope. So if you want to change the world, start singing when you're up to your neck in mud. It's a really powerful one sentence paragraph used throughout his speech. And so, up to your neck in mud is a metaphor for the power of hope. And so, up to your neck in mud represents, as you have probably worked out, being in a really bad situation where everything seems terrible. And start singing is a metaphor for believing in yourself and changing your perspective to see the good in things. So, you've also got direct address if you want to change the world, and the effectiveness of that is obviously talking directly to the audience creates a sense of connection between them and empowers them with the message being spoken. And so do make sure you've noted all those points, especially about the one sentence paragraph. And remember, one sentence paragraphs are used for emphasis. And so if he'd used a number of them throughout, it wouldn't be as powerful. But you can contrast the larger paragraphs with this one sentence paragraph. And also don't forget, in the penultimate paragraph, he lists famous people. So he uses examples. You could also say he alludes. So you've got the technique of allusion to famous people who changed the world. You've also got the repetition of power, the power of hope, the power of one person, to kind of represent a shift away from the powerlessness and the futility, or the betrayed futility of pain. Futility, as I'm sure you know, means pointlessness. And then you got that shift towards powerfulness and empowerment of an individual person, even when faced with seemingly insurmountable odds. Okay, so that is our analysis. So please do make sure you've noted all of that down. This will directly benefit you when you're doing your question 3, picking out language and structure. So make sure you've got that all written down in your books. Okay, so what I'd like you to do next, how does Admiral McRaven use language and structure to convince the reader of the importance of hope? What I'd like you to do is, we've done the analysis together, so we've done the hard bit. Now what you need to do is write at least 2 paragraphs in response, one on structure and one on language. Follow the 3-part paragraph structure and upload this onto ClassCharts. I would also like you to upload your annotated version of the script that we went through together just now. But I need to make sure that you've actually made those notes. So 2 things to upload, the annotated version of that speech and also your 2 paragraphs. If you would like to make more points than one on language, one on structure, that's fine. The key thing is just spend 15 minutes and see how much you can do. So please pause the video to do that now. And some critical style top tips. So I'd like you to now go back through it and make sure you've done the following. That you haven't used vague phrases, you have embedded quotes, you've used short quotes, no more than 4 to 6 words, you've identified techniques, and you've explained the effects clearly with reference to the reader. So please make sure you've done all those things. Okay, and that is the end of today's lesson. So thank you very much for your hard work. I hope this speech has inspired you if you were feeling a bit down, or even if you weren't. I think it's a very, very inspiring speech, so hopefully you enjoyed it. and I will speak to you tomorrow.